Okay, welcome everyone to the second installment of our virtual backpacking school training presented by the Miami group of the Sierra Club. Sierra Club is committed to a safety first culture, and as a result, unfortunately, we had to suspend all of our outings events and unfortunately our backpacking school when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. But we truly enjoy sharing our experiences, sharing our knowledge, our skill with people in hopes that it'll make it easier for them to get out there and experience and enjoy the backcountry. So we've chosen this virtual platform as a way to continue doing that, and we hope that when the pandemic passes, that we'll see a lot more of our friends and neighbors out there safely and confidently enjoying the outdoors. Many people view the outdoors as a refuge of sorts, a place they can escape to, particularly in trying times. So I think it would be remiss if we didn't take the opportunity to say something about the ongoing protests against social injustice. The Sierra Club is committed to social equity, but in particular, we're committed to ensuring that the outdoors, including our national parks, our local parks, our wilderness areas, make sure that all of those are a safe and inclusive environment for everyone to enjoy. So, as we go through this, keep all of those who are suffering medically or suffering economically or suffering from social injustice, keep them in your thoughts, and more importantly, let's keep them all in our actions. So it looks like we still have people are continuing to arrive, so let me also mention that at the end of this presentation, we will post a link that will take you to a PDF version of the presentation and also a backpacking gear list, as well as a 10 essentials list. And that will all be on the Sierra Club website. There's also going to be a schedule out there of upcoming webinars in this series as those are finalized. And you'll find a whole host of other hopefully interesting content out on that website. Our monthly educational meetings and schedules are posted out there, our newsletter, various ways that you can take action or participate or contribute to causes and environmental issues. And of course, once we get started again, you'll find the schedule of our outings. So our hikes, our backpacking trips, our paddle trips, all of that will be out there as well. Okay. So, a little trouble here advancing. Hang on a second. There we go. Okay. So a few points before we get started about the Zoom platform for those of you who may not be familiar with it. You won't be able to unmute yourself during the presentation, but we still want to hear from you. Your questions are encouraged. So there's this chat box down here, and you can use that button to open a new box where you can type in any questions that you have. You can also use that chat box if you have any technical issues that you need addressed, and we'll have somebody monitoring the chat throughout this. There's also this participants button that you can click that will show you the participants on the call and specifically will allow you to raise your hand. And we may have a few points where we ask your opinion or you weigh in on something and raise your hand. So we'll take a deeper look at that in a second here. And finally, there is a stop video function here. We do encourage you to leave your video working. We just think it helps keep everyone more engaged. But if you're uncomfortable with that, you can certainly turn your video off. Okay. So when you click that participants box that I mentioned before, you'll see a screen that looks like this and these menu options at the right. And this is where you should be able to do a raise hand. And at the bottom of that menu is that chat box that I was talking about. So if you have any questions, any comments, anything you want to throw out there, just do it in the chat box and we'll be monitoring that. If you do want to rename yourselves and how you're represented in this webinar, you can do that by hovering over your name. Okay. A couple more details before we get started. We're going to have some polls as we go through this, the content. Your answers are confidential. We don't see who answered how. All we see is the percentage of people that answered a particular question in a particular way. Polls will pop up on your screen and give you the option to select one or multiple answers depending on the poll. If any of that doesn't work, you don't understand it, you can ask for help in the chat box. We discourage you from using full screen just because it makes it a little more difficult to keep track of those chat boxes and participant boxes for the raise your hand function. So try not to use that. We are recording this webinar, and that recording will be posted and available 2 or 3 days after the end of this. But your picture will not appear. Even if you turn on your video, your picture will not appear. Okay, let's get started. Your basics for backpacking: kitchen sink or just a toothbrush? Spoiler alert, correct answer is neither of those. So welcome to today's session. We're going to be covering some of the basic principles of gear selection for a backpacking trip and provide a high-level overview of each of the major categories of gear that you would need. In follow-on sessions, we'll be doing a deep dive on each of those major categories. So shelters, sleep systems, cooking, food, doing a deep dive whole hour session on each of those. So if you do have a specific topic that you're interested in, you're in the market for a new tent, your sleep system just isn't working for you, you're ready to try some more advanced backcountry cooking, keep an eye out for those specific webinars, those sessions. And just a quick note on the pictures, both of this presentation and actually our prior presentation of Leave No Trace. None of that is stock footage. Those are all pictures actually taken from our trips, and we don't label them. But if you do see something that's of interest to you and you say, wow, that looks pretty cool, I wonder where that was, just throw it in the chat box and we'll try to remember where that picture was taken and let you know. Okay. So your presenters for this webinar are all experienced campers, hikers, backpackers, and additionally, we're all trainers in the Sierra Club Backpacking School. My name is Barry Randall, also known as Aardvark. I wish there was some clever story behind that name. Unfortunately, there isn't. If you got any ideas, I'd love to make something up that I could use. I've been camping, hiking, backpacking, doing this sort of thing for far more years than I care to remember. And currently, I'm the outings chairperson for the Miami Group Sierra Club, which means I manage the committee that plans all of our outdoor events. With that, I'm going to ask Nancy to introduce herself.
Thanks, Barry. My name's Nancy Ball, also known as Crunch. I don't have a great story for how I got my name either, but if you're interested, I'll share it with you sometime. I've been backpacking and leading trips since 2005 and hiking and camping long before then. So I've been leading trips close to home as well as locations really all around the world. This past year, I opened my new company called Summit Truck and Travel, which is a business planning and leading adventure trips. And I think Denise is next.
Hi, I'm Denise Tingle. Actually, Pippi Longstocking is my trail name, which I got on the trail 2 years ago doing a section hike with Nancy, actually, because I usually wear braids in my hair when I'm backpacking. So I've been backpacking and hiking for about the 45 plus last 45 plus years, and I am the hiking cheerleader for the Miami Group Sierra Club, along with an instructor for the backpacking school. In addition, I lead cycling rides and backpacking trips, and my passion is backpacking and cycling or anything. I just love the outdoors. Brian, and welcome this evening. We're glad to have you.
Yes. Guys, thanks for having me. My name is Brian Wolf. I'm one of the co-owners at Roads, Rivers, and Trails. We're an outdoor outfitter in Milford, Ohio. So we're celebrating our 10th year this year, and hopefully get to meet each of you as you plan your trips and kind of get started. We are always here both to help equip you, but then really help hopefully inspire or educate you in different ways, and definitely just here to help. So look forward to meeting you guys.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. And definitely, if you get a chance, check out Roads, Rivers, and Trails, as well as Summit Trek and Trail, because they're great friends and great partners of ours. Before we get into the gear, it is coming, I promise. We do want to just really quickly recap the topic from our last session, just because it's so important. Leave no trace. So leave no trace is really more of a mindset. It's not a set of rules. And the mindset is pretty simple. Pass through an area without leaving any trace that you've been there. And because hiking and backpacking have become more and more popular over the past couple of decades, this has just become all the more important. More and more people are out there enjoying nature, but unfortunately, even when people are trying not to, that creates some damage. The impact from just one season of normal use in the backcountry can take up to 30 years to recover. And that was all before COVID-19. Of course, with schools closed and businesses closed and all that going on, there's just been a really resurgence, if you will, and interest in getting outdoors and getting out to our parks. And it's just caused even more crowds and potentially more damage. So leave no trace just becomes all that more important. So quickly, the 7 principles are plan ahead and prepare. And what that's talking about is just when we go off plan, when things don't come together right, that's when we end up bushwhacking through some area. That's when we end up camping in a non-designated campsite. So planning ahead and preparing is an important aspect of protecting the outdoors. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. There's lots of fragile vegetation out there, so stay on the trail. Dispose of waste properly. That means you pack out everything you brought in, except human waste, and pack out toilet paper as well, and dispose of the human waste properly. Leave what you find. That just means you don't pick up souvenirs. So no pretty rocks, no wildflowers, no Indian pottery shard artifacts, none of that, just leave it. Minimize campfire impact. That means that in designated sites, you use the existing campfire ring. And if you're in a backcountry area that doesn't have designated sites, it means making sure that fire is dead out and then dispersing it so that no one can actually tell it was ever there. Respect wildlife. Remember, you are in their home and you really don't want to disrupt them either with your presence or your activities or with your food. So you really don't want that selfie with grizzly. Actually, that could be both impacting them, your activities, and as their food. So just keep your distance. And finally, be considerate to other visitors. Why don't we take a second here, and if we can do a quick show of hands, how many folks have ever been out in the environment, in the outdoors somewhere, and had someone playing loud music, somebody maybe revving their motorcycle in an adjacent area, doing something that just really, really was annoying and kind of ruined the experience for you. Now, I see a few hands up there. Yeah, pretty much anyone who's ever spent much time in the outdoors can answer that. Definitely yes. So again, be considerate. not only do you want your presence not to be impact the environment, you don't want it to impact other people as well. Okay, so we're going to go into our first poll here, and we're going to ask you about your backpacking style. So hiking style and your personal goals will actually influence your gear choices. So we're wondering, are you the kind of person that likes to move fast and rack up some really big miles on the trail? Or maybe you're the kind of person that likes to take their time, enjoy the scenery, see some wildlife, take lots of photos. Or maybe it's relaxing in the campsite. You know, you like hiking, but you really want a comfortable campsite and a nice, cushy, comfortable bed at night to sleep. Or maybe you like hiking well enough, but really it's that eating out of doors, that gourmet meal around the campfire, that's what really gets you going. So Denise, can you go ahead and launch the poll? So for those who maybe missed the introduction, you should be able to go out here and make a selection as to which of these categories probably best fits your style. Getting a lot of take it slow and enjoy the scenery. Now, that's good. You're living in the moment. Give folks a couple of other minutes here. Wow. It's unanimous. We all love taking it slow and enjoying the scenery and the photos. That's great. Okay. You want to close that out and share it, Denise? Thank you. All right. So thank you for participating in that. So let's get into some of the basic gear principles. So regardless of what your goal is, what your style is, there's some basic principles that pretty much apply across the board. And the first of those is to choose the lightest gear that meets your needs. And your needs are going to be different from everyone else's, so this is very specific to you. What are your goals? What's your acceptable level of comfort? What's your budget? So pick the thing that's the best fit for you, but try and go lightweight within that space. You should weigh your pack. You should weigh the things in your pack. The rule of thumb used to be that your pack should weigh no more than a third of your body weight. A fifth, 20% is probably a better target. But regardless, make sure you know how much weight you're carrying. And then the second point is to think multi-purpose. So for each piece of gear, think about different ways that you can use that gear so that you can only carry one thing instead of, excuse me, instead of two. And we'll have an exercise on this actually a little later in the presentation. But for example, do you really need a windbreaker and a rain jacket? You know, why carry both? Can you just use the rain jacket for a wind shell? The next category is to share the gear. Share the gear where you can, because when you share the gear, you're sharing the weight. So if you're traveling with a group, if you're traveling with a partner, think about sharing a tent. Think about sharing your stove. Think about sharing a rain tarp. I like, for a cook stove, I actually like what's called a jet boil. It's a brand of canister stove. I like it because it's super efficient. You can boil water in a heartbeat with it. There are a lot of lighter stoves though. An alcohol stove, for example, is much, much lighter than a jet boil stove. But I can share my jet boil with 2, maybe even 3 or 4 people on that trip. And if I do that, I've got half or a third of the weight that I'm carrying, but I get all the benefits. I can still boil water in a heartbeat. So just think of things like that where you might be able to take advantage of something that gives you a little more comfort and share the weight with other folks. And the next point is to be prepared, but don't be over prepared. It's real easy to get caught up in this mindset of, but what if, when it comes to gear. And most beginners, frankly, just take too much gear because they're trying to cover every contingency known to man. I've had people ask me, well, should I bring an extra pair of hiking clothes? Because what if I'm crossing a river and I slip on a rock and I fall in and I get soaking wet, which could happen. I was thinking this through, and conservatively in the last 10 years, I've probably been on 10 backpacking trips a year with maybe a half a dozen people on each trip. So let's say that's 600 person trips. In that time, I have actually seen 2 people fall in a river and get soaking wet. So it does happen. But that's 1 in 300 times. So that's 299 times that I would be carrying that extra stuff in case this happens. And even if it does happen, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to hike wet for a while, which is why you wear quick dry clothing. Or you're going to throw on your rain pants and maybe a base layer that you normally sleep in or something like that. In other words, you'll survive, you'll manage. So don't overthink things, don't be overly cautious, be prepared but not over prepared. And finally, if you're going to carry it, know how to use it. It's amazing how many people show up on a trip and they've never set up their tent. They've never used their stove. It might be their 100th trip and they've always carried a compass, but they have no idea how to use that compass. I don't know if any of you follow the Backpacker Magazine podcast. It's called Out Alive. If you don't, I highly recommend it. It's very entertaining, very interesting survival kind of stuff. But there's one story in there about a group that's hiking. They're caught in a landslide. One of the party is seriously injured. They don't have any kind of cell service or anything. So one of them starts hiking back to the trailhead, runs into another hiker on the way back who has a spot. A spot is a satellite device that signals for help. Well, as it turns out, though, this person with the spot had no idea how to use it. They didn't even have it out of its original packaging that they had bought from the store. So if you're going to carry it, for God's sake, know how to use it. Okay? And next, we're going to talk a little bit about gear lists. Like I said before, we're going to post a gear list that's our recommendation out on the website after this. But if you go out there and Google backpacking gear lists, you will find a plethora of different gear lists, many, many. And it's all good. It can actually be very entertaining if you're kind of a gearhead and like looking at lists and comparing lists and saying, oh, wow, I never thought of bringing one of those, or why would you bring one of those? So it's all good. Our gear list is not particularly the best or the brightest, right? But a couple of caveats as you go out there and you're browsing around gear lists. One is be wary of any list that clearly violates leave no trace. So if you have something like an axe on the list, you really shouldn't be starting a fire with wood that you can't break with your hands or your feet anyway, besides the fact that axes are incredibly heavy. So if you see stuff like that on the list, I'd be a little leery. The next area that you want to be a little bit leery of is lists that tend towards the zombie apocalypse. So these are lists where they're trying to imagine these incredibly horrific threats, right? And you start to see things like guns and Bowie knives and machetes. None of that really has any place in backpacking. You won't find any use for it. And frankly, you're just gonna kind of freak out all the other people around you if you're carrying that kind of stuff. I've hiked with a guy who is carrying a gun because his thing was, well, what about if we run into a bear? Well, first off, the chances of running into an aggressive bear are very small. The chances of you being able to do something about that with a gun are essentially non-existent. And of course, on the trip, at one of the times he was bending over to pick something up, his gun falls out of his holster and goes tumbling down the trail. So just that kind of stuff just has no place. And contrary-wise, or the other extreme, be a little wary of ultralight lists or lists that seem to leave out too much. I was looking at a YouTube video the other day, which actually was an excellent video, a lot of useful information. And what the guy was doing is he was putting together a gear list with everything you needed to go backpacking from $600 to $700 total price. And but the challenging thing was he was bringing in the base weight of that pack to 10 pounds, under 10 pounds actually. And we're going to talk about base weight of backpacks later on in different sessions, but a 10-pound base weight is actually pretty impressive. And actually to do that for $600 to $700 is very impressive. But as I went through the video, I realized he's talking about warm weather with no rain, because he didn't have a puffy, he didn't have a fleece, he didn't have any kind of base layer, he didn't have gloves, he didn't have a hat, he didn't have rain gear. He did have an emergency, one of those really thin poncho things that's kind of like saran wrap, but not something you want to wear if it's actually raining on the trail. So again, be a little conscious if it seems like maybe they're leaving out a few things. Our advice, try and find a complete but conservative list, and then consciously eliminate things that either aren't part of your style. So you might see, say, a sit-upon or a camp chair on our list. Well, if that's just not part of your comfort, then fine, leave it off. Or things that truly don't apply, and if you are doing a backpack trip in the desert where it doesn't rain, well, then yeah, pack accordingly. But hopefully our list is a complete one that you can then skinny down for your particular style and your particular trip. Okay. We're going to take a minute now to answer any questions that we have percolating out there. I don't know, Brian or Nancy, if we've got anything out there yet.
Guys, nothing yet, but shoot them out there. I know there's questions to be had. You know, when we do our pack shakedowns, there's plenty of questions and plenty of problems that we kind of see. You know, whether it's Barry brought up a lot of good points, whether it's food packing or redundant gear or survival gear. So feel free to shoot them out there as you have questions about that kind of stuff.
And we'll stop again a couple more times to answer questions, and also at the very end of this presentation, if we have time and you all are still with us, we'll actually have a chance to answer some questions that you can ask live. So we'll unmute you so that you can ask your questions later. So take notes and put things in that chat box as questions come up as we go along.
Okay.
But for now, Barry, why don't we just go ahead and move on to 10 essentials?
Yep. Okay.
So we're going to start talking now about some of the things that you do want to put in that pack, some of the things that you do need to have with you to go backpacking. And at the very top of your list of necessary equipment, there are 10 essential items that you should always have with you. And it doesn't matter how long you plan to be out or where you're hiking. In fact, you should carry these on day hikes as well. I have to tell you that I learned that lesson the hard way. About 15 years ago, my husband and I were training for a big trip, and we did a training hike on a trail we hadn't done before, but we didn't think it was going to be a big deal. But after about the first 2 miles, the trail really, really degenerated. It was overgrown. There were crisscrossing paths that weren't marked. There were old places and new places. It was a mess. And we ended up getting lost, like really very lost. And the only thing that we had with us was we had a handful of snacks, and we each had a liter of water. That's all we took with us, because it's supposed to be just a quick, easy, long hike but fast. But after we'd passed the same marker for like the third time, we realized we were going around in circles. I was also breaking in a brand new pair of boots, and before this trip was over, I had developed huge blisters on the bottoms of my feet. We had planned to be back to our car by 4 o'clock, but we did not get back until well after the sun went down. We were still lost when it got dark outside. We ran out of food, we ran out of water, we had no cell service, so there was no way to signal anybody for help. It was really bad, and we were actually considering sitting down to just sit underneath a tree and wait for the sun to come up. The only light we had was this tiny little LED light on the end of my husband's keychain. So with that little bitty light, we actually finally found a sign that we recognized, and we knew where we were, and we were able to get out. So it was 10 o'clock at night, and we finally exited that trail. I have to tell you, it was a really, really good learning experience, but I do not recommend learning that way. Things really could have been a whole lot worse. We were super lucky. But now whenever I go out at all, even just for a day hike, I carry 10 essential items with me. And the first one is something for navigation. So you want to have a compass with you and a map. And more importantly, as Gary said before, don't take it with you if you don't know how to use it. You really need to learn how to use them. Take an orienteering class if you really want to get it down. You need a way to signal. Free of anything means help, so a whistle will do. In fact, most backpacks that I've seen in recent years, there's a whistle built in right on the sternum strap. So check your backpack and maybe you'll find one. It's like made as part of the buckle. But if you don't have one, spend $3 or $4 and get a little plastic cheap whistle just so you have some way of signaling for help. The next thing is something for light. Make sure you have actually a light and some sort of backup. I usually carry a headlamp with extra batteries and a little solar lamp so that I've always got, this is one of those things where redundancy is good. There's some key items you want to make sure you do have, especially things that can go wrong. Insulation, you want to stay dry, so have rain gear and put it on before you get soaking wet. In the same way with something warm, so put your warm layers on. For instance, whenever you stop hiking, you're going to start to chill down right away. You want to be sure you have warm layers to put on. Always have a first aid kit. I could have used one for those blisters. Because I didn't have one, I could do nothing except just continue to walk on them and let them get bigger and bigger. Make sure that you have a way to start fire. That means a fire starter and either a lighter or matches. Some sort of repair kit. For me, my pocket knife and just a little bit of duct tape wrapped around my trekking pole is my repair kit. There's a saying that if duct tape won't fix it, you didn't use enough duct tape. It takes care of almost everything. Something for extra nutrition. If you're on a day hike, maybe that's just an energy bar. But maybe if you're out for a 5-day backpack, you want to bring 2 extra meals with you just to be safe. But make sure you have plenty. Again, don't overplan, but make sure you've got spares for things that might go wrong. Hydration. Make sure you always have a way to get water. Even when I'm day hiking, if I'm carrying my 2 liters of water with me, I still carry, at the very least, they carry water purification tablets with me. So I always have a way to make drinkable water. And then the last one on the list is something that you can use for an emergency shelter. That could be like a solar blanket or a little super lightweight tarp, or even a 55-gallon trash bag will work. That can be used for, you can sleep in it. You can wear it for rain gear. You can open it up and use it as a tarp. You can stuff it full of leaves and use it as insulation between you and the ground. And then lastly, depending on your trip, there may be other things that you want to add on, like additional food, bug repellent, sun protection. But those 10 things you want to have with you on every trip. It doesn't matter where you're going. Every time you want to have those with you. So let's talk about packs next. We're going to start off with a poll, and we've got some questions here for you to consider. Which of these things are important to consider when you're purchasing a pack? And you can check all that apply, the capacity, how much it will hold, the fit of the pack, whether it has pockets and pouches where you can keep your things separated and organized, how durable it is, what the price is, what it weighs, things like daisy chains and loops and belts that you can hook things onto. So if Denise will launch the next poll for us, go ahead and select as many answers as you think are correct for you in terms of what are the important things to consider when you're looking for a pack. Boom, right off the bat, everything has at least one vote already. This will be interesting. We'll give you about 10 more seconds here. Just a couple people left, so. Okay, Denise, if you would go ahead and close that out and share the results with all of us. So this is great. We've got a real range of answers, and everything right off the bat had at least one vote on it. And you can see some of these, everybody selected them as being important. So we can go ahead and close out that poll and hide the results. So the truth is, there is no one right answer to that question. There are no 5 right answers to that question, because again, as Barry emphasized earlier, you're going to hike your own hike, and different things will be important to you depending on what kind of hike you plan to take, and what you enjoy the most, whether it's time in camp or making long treks or having a campfire. As those things will all impact your gear. Just as a reminder, all these things are just going to be introductory level, and in future webinars, we're going to go deeper into each of them. And in fact, next Thursday, Brian is going to be doing a session specifically on packs. But for now, let's just kind of get a little bit conversant in the topic. So 3 things to think about in terms of your backpack. One is the pack itself. The second one is a pack cover. You actually have to have a separate pack cover for most packs. Most of them come with a pack. It's in a separate pouch, but not all of them do. So make sure that you get that necessary item. And then something like a trash bag that serves as a liner to help keep things waterproof inside. So things that are important in selecting your pack, important to everyone, is the pack size. First of all, your torso length, the hip belt size, and sometimes even shoulder straps are all part of backpack sizing. And it's really important for your pack to fit right. If it's too big or too small, you're not going to be able to carry the load comfortably, and you're also likely to end up with sore spots on your body. This is one of those things where you would be well served to have a professional fit you, somebody like Brian at Roads, Rivers, and Trails, in fact. Your pack will also have a number of adjustments, everything from load lifters to compression straps and more. And knowing how to adjust it, how to shift things around, and what those adjustments do to help you have a good fit and to help you carry the load well is also important. The next thing I'd say is avoid giant capacity packs. My very first pack was a 65-liter pack. It was way more than I needed, but I filled that sucker totally. I don't think I ever got it, even when I was trying to lighten up, I never got it below 40 pounds because it just invites you to stick in all kinds of things that maybe you don't really even need. But even if you only put a few things in, if you keep what's in there lightweight, the pack itself will weigh more. The packs that are made to carry more gear also have more padding. They'll have thicker hip belts, thicker shoulder straps, and all those things add weight to the pack. My 65-liter beginner pack weighed 7 pounds empty. So a lot of people go for a mid-range pack, but some people are really into the lightweight, and many of the lightweight, the super lightweight packs are nothing but just a big open sack, just a big open bag. That might be too simple for you, and that's fine. Again, you're going to hike your own hike, but do keep in mind that everything you add to that big main pouch is going to add weight. So every zipper, every strap, every pocket, every pouch is adding weight to your pack. So the real important takeaway here is that a properly fitted pack that's properly packed and properly adjusted makes all the difference between a pleasant trip and a painful trip. Let's move on to shelters. So the main components here, the tent, the stakes, the poles, the footprint, and some extra rope or paracord. There are alternatives to backpacking tents like tarps or hammocks and bivy sacks. And additionally, there's some hybrids too, like tarp tents. But most beginners opt for a 3-season freestanding tent, like the Big Agnes tent that you see here. Should say most beginners, but also like that's the kind of tent most of us are still carrying all these years after starting to backpack, because they're very functional. They're relatively simple to set up, and they're very forgiving. The 3-season refers to spring, summer, fall, but we still use these in the winter too, as long as you're not doing mountaineering or something really extreme. They work for winter camping as well. Freestanding means that with all the poles in place, the tent can stand on its own, even if it isn't staked to the ground. So freestanding and semi-freestanding tents are generally easier to set up than others, even if they still need to be staked down for weather and wind and what have you, but just the setting up process is easier. Let's see, the next thing is a double wall tent. A double wall tent has a body with a separate fly, and that creates a space between the 2 layers that helps keep condensation down inside the tent. I personally have never used a single wall tent. Here in the relatively humid Midwest, you tend to get condensation in those. However, they are much lighter, and in a dry climate, condensation might not be an issue for you. When you're shopping for a tent, ask the store to set it up for you and let you get a feel for it by actually crawling inside and lying down in there. While you're considering it, think about the number of doors and the placement of the doors. If you're sharing a tent with somebody else, you might want a door on either side. Think about the size of the vestibule that you want, which is just a handy place to keep your boots and water bottles, and sometimes you want to have other things there as well. And also weight. So this is probably your heaviest item. And this is also the spot where the price can really go up. So there are some super lightweight materials like Cuban fiber, which is also called Dyneema, which is very durable and ultra light, but it's also pretty expensive. But you can still get a really decent tent that is a good weight and for a reasonable price. We'll move on to sleep systems now. A sleep system consists of sleeping bag or quilt. The quilts become more popular recently. Also a sleeping pad and an optional bag liner. So sleeping bag fill options all have their pros and cons. Down is lighter and it also compresses well, so it's very packable. At the same time, it doesn't insulate very well when it's wet. Synthetics do insulate well, and they generally are cheaper, but they're also bulkier and heavier compared to a down bag that is rated for the same warmth. There's another option called hydrophobic down, which has been treated to provide some water resistant qualities, and it's kind of a good compromise between the two, but it's also more expensive than the other two. You should be aware that manufacturers' temperature ratings can be very subjective, but there are some standardized ratings. One's called EN, or European Normal, and another is ISO, which stands for International Standards Organization. And in these ratings, the ratings range from women's comfort, which basically is saying that women, we tend to sleep colder, that we would be comfortable at the set degrees that it's advertising itself at to spend the night in it. And it goes all the way down to a lower limit rating, which is more like what the average man could tolerate for an overnight without going into hypothermia. Be aware that if your bag isn't rated using one of these systems, or like if you're borrowing a bag, an older bag from somebody else, it's possible that the temperature rating on your bag could mean literally that it's the coldest temperature that you could be expected to survive for 6 hours without going into hypothermia. So if you're not certain of your bag's temperature rating or how that rating was derived at, I totally recommend that you sleep in it outside in your own backyard at least once at the temperature that you think you'll be experiencing before you take it out on the trail. Other things about the pack have to do with the fit of it. If you're tall or broad-shouldered, packs are made with different widths and different lengths. Women's bags are specifically designed to be broader at the hips and more narrow at the shoulders. Again, this is something where try it on at the store. Ask the store to let you crawl into it and try it on for size. Mummy bags versus rectangular bags. Everybody has their own preference, and you need to be able to sleep comfortably. So sleeping pads generally come in 3 types: self-inflating, inflatable, and closed cell. Self-inflating pads are pretty handy, but they tend to weigh a lot more than the other options do. Closed foam pads are very inexpensive, very light, and very reliable, but most people find the air pads, the ones that you blow up, are actually more comfortable. So there are 2 advantages to a sleeping bag liner. One is that it can add 10 to 15 degrees of warmth to your bag, and the other is that it helps protect your bag from dirt and body oils and what have you. It keeps it cleaner, which can extend the life of your bag. And then we're going to move on to talk about clothing. And you can read the list there yourself of some of the specific items that we're going to refer to. One of the most important things to think about, though, is the clothing material. That's an important factor in retaining heat and breathability and quick dry qualities. Those are all important in backpacking. And by far, synthetics and wool are the best. So a saying to remember is wool is wonderful and cotton is rotten. Cotton is not a good thing to take on a backpacking trip because it retains moisture and it wicks heat away from your body as opposed to wicking dampness away from your body. There's another more sober saying that I've heard some rangers use, and that is cotton kills, because people who have gotten exposed to some unexpected weather actually have died from exposure, in part at least because they were wearing all cotton clothing. The specific clothing that you take on a trip will depend heavily on the season and weather, of course. But for most shoulder season, meaning spring and fall, and of course for winter camping as well, you're going to want at least a puffy, a fleece, and a base layer. And the base layer, we're just talking about some kind of long insulated underwear or something similar that goes next to your skin. You want to think of it in terms of a layering system to keep yourself warm. If you have one single heavy item, like a great big coat, you're going to have a hard time regulating your temperature. You're either going to be too hot or too cold all the time, depending on whether you have that coat on or off. But when you can add and subtract layers, it's a lot easier to dial in your comfort level. Just this past week, I saw a crazy back and forth discussion on a backpacking website about how many changes of clothes to take for a 4-day backpacking trip. And it ranged from 3 complete sets to I don't take any clean clothes. You honestly don't need to worry about changing your clothes all that often, in my opinion, when you're backpacking. You're going to get dirty, and within a couple of hours of packing, you're not going to feel like you have clean clothes on anyway. My rule of thumb is that I take 1 clean shirt for every 5 days and 1 clean pair of pants for every 10 days. I do take changes of socks because I want to be sure my feet can be kept dry. And I will take some clean underwear for anybody who might be worried about that. That might not be the right style for everyone, but the truth is you really don't have to worry about having clean outer clothes. And clothes, frankly, weigh a lot. So that's an area where you can easily lighten up your pack by keeping that down. And I think we are now ready to go to our next question slide. Do we have any questions that have come up?
I did want to point out that I think that's Denise in that picture. And even though I'm sure she's got all the appropriate clothing, she looks a little cold. Okay, questions.
We do have some questions. First, we'll address, I added in the chat box, they say to dress like an onion. So to clarify that, it's just because an onion has lots of layers. So it's just kind of a fun way to kind of teach it and be able to quickly adapt to changing environments. Another question, and this one was a good one. What is a bivvy? Anybody want to take that? Anybody bivvy camp? Barry or niece, Nancy?
I have, and you can correct me if my definition is off, Brian, but a bivvy is basically just a weatherproof sack that's pretty much as big as a sleeping bag, not much more. So they're very tight, confining. They do protect you from the weather. There's zero storage or any space in there for anything but you or your sleeping bag. I personally don't like bivvies because to me, I could carry a tarp that would be just as lightweight, but at least give me a little more room to move around. So I don't know, Brian, do you have a different take on that?
Nope, you nailed it, Barry. They're often considered more of an emergency kind of backup than they are your everyday camp shelter.
You might not be watching it right now.
Cool. Any other questions out there? I don't see any.
Nope. Okay. Well, we can keep moving along then. All right. Well, thank you for that, Nancy. And if anyone else thinks along the way of questions on those categories or any categories, just throw them out there and we don't mind revisiting them. So let's talk a little bit about footwear though. So in the footwear category, we've got, of course, the hiking shoes or boots, water shoes / camp shoes, if you choose to take those, gaiters. And I threw trekking poles on footwear, even though you obviously do not wear trekking poles on your feet, but I'll explain that in a second here. So many backpackers are moving from the heavier boots to a lighter shoe. It's certainly a personal choice, but there's a reason why a lot of people are moving, because a pound of weight on your feet equates to about 5 pounds of weight on your back. So that means if you go from a 3-pound pair of boots to a 1-pound pair of shoes, you've shaved roughly 10 pounds off the weight of your pack, or the equivalent of that in terms of the energy you have to expend. Again, there are times though when, for cold or wet or rocky terrain, I still prefer a boot. but lightweight shoes are definitely the dominant thing you're going to see out there these days. Whatever you're wearing, break them in 10 to 25 miles before you go out on a real trip. Shoes obviously break in faster than a heavier boot, but part of this is just to make sure that you've got the right fit, that you're not going to develop any hot spots or other issues on your trip. And then, of course, you have a choice of waterproof or not waterproof. So waterproof boots or waterproof shoes or not. And again, this is another of those personal choices. I find that waterproof helps if I'm walking on a wet trail or crossing a creek that has a half-inch of water running across some rocks. I can do that and my feet will stay dry. Be aware though that if it's raining, any kind of serious rain, your feet are going to get wet. Doesn't matter what's on your feet, they are going to get wet. You're either going to get wet from the rain or they're going to get wet because your feet are sweating, and waterproof shoes and boots stop breathing once the exterior of the shoe gets soaked. So you'll just sweat your feet in there. So that's actually why some people prefer non-waterproof shoes, because they tend to dry faster. So if they think they're going to be in an area where they're going to get wet anyway, having a shoe that just quickly dries as you're walking down the trail, some people really prefer that. They'll just wade across that water crossing and then just let their feet dry as they walk. But again, kind of a personal choice. And as far as water shoes or camp shoes, if you do opt for that, think lightweight. Think something like a croc kind of material, if you know what those are, the stiff plastic, something along those lines. And coming back to trekking poles, just the reason I put them in footwear is one of the reasons people use trekking poles is that they do take weight off your feet, off your knees, off your legs, and transfer that weight to your arms and your shoulders. So the weight of a pack should really sit on your hips, and you want to try and keep as much of the jarring motion of hiking transferred up to your upper body if that's at all possible. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about cooking and food storage. So got a list here that includes everything from stove and fuel, cook pot, cup, bowl, spoon, spork, something to store your food in, a bear canister, an sack, which is basically a rodent-proof metal sack, or a bear hang, which is typically a piece of line and maybe a carabiner that you use up in a tree, a food bag, and I threw sit pad and chair in here because a lot of people like something like that as they're sitting around the fire and doing their cooking. Most beginners are going to opt for a canister stove, much like the reasons that they opt for a three-season freestanding tent. They're very reliable. They're pretty simple to use. They do have some downsides. In very cold weather, canisters can be finicky. A lot of people in cold weather, they'll sleep with their canister in their tent or in their sleeping bag for that reason. There are other options, obviously, liquid fuel or white gas stoves, alcohol stoves, both popular choices, and we'll cover those again in later sessions. And of course, there's always the option not to cook at all, do a no-cook trip, and then you can eliminate actually several of these things. Food storage for making sure that you're taking care of the critters properly is incredibly important. So whether it's a bear hang or a canister or something like that, you need something if you're not in a campsite that provides a bear vault or some kind of permanent way of storing your food. You never want to have the food in your tent, and you want it away from your cooking area. And even if you're not concerned about bears, believe me, mice, squirrels, chipmunks, they will chew through anything to get to that granola bar that's in your pack. And it's really, really annoying to wake up in the morning and have a big hole in your pack where some mouse has gone in and eaten your breakfast. We'll talk about actual food at length in a different session. There's just a lot of different options there. Most beginners are going to opt for a prepackaged, freeze-dried meal like a Mountain House or maybe a no cook, just because those are the simplest things to do. But you can do your own dehydrated food. You can do the Ziploc meals in a bag. There's just lots of options. So lots of ways to have fun with this, and we'll cover in future sessions. And the next topic we're going to talk about is water. And that includes both your method of carrying water, so water bottles or some kind of hydration bladder, as well as way to filter or treat the water, either a filter or a SteriPen or some kind of chemical treatment. So water flowing in the backcountry certainly looks like you could just drink out of the stream. And in many cases you probably could, but it really isn't worth the risk. And you really should plan on filtering or treating all water because it could be contaminated with bacteria, viruses, parasites, other contaminants. Water filters like a Sawyer filter, which is one of the popular ones, will remove particles down to 0.2 microns, which is basically the size of bacteria. And that's really adequate for most backcountry trips. A purifier, which is really just a finer filter, or chemical treatment, or ultraviolet treatment, which is what a SteriPen is, takes care of things down to 0.04 microns, which are viruses. So that's like hepatitis and that sort of thing. As far as carrying your water, hydration packs, which is a bladder that sits in the back of your pack, are popular. They encourage you to drink, and staying hydrated in the backcountry is really important. So they have a huge advantage there. They can be awkward to get at when it's time to purify and refill your water. It's tough to gauge how much water you have because of course you can't see it, and of course they do sometimes leak, and that can be super annoying. If you're going to go with a water bottle, personally, I find a smart water bottle, something of that nature, to be cheap, easy, just as good as purchasing an Nalgene or something like that for $8 or whatever it is. So, and I've had smart water bottles that have last literally years. So they work fine. However you carry water, this does get back to trip planning, and we will have a couple of sessions specifically on trip planning and talk about finding and planning for water. But water is one of the heaviest things you're going to be carrying. At 2.2 pounds per liter, it's heavy. So you do want to plan your trip so that you stay hydrated, but you're carrying the minimum amount of water at any given time. Okay. Next topic we're moving on to is safety and hygiene. So this is, there's a lot going on in this category. Obviously, it's important that you both protect yourself and have the ability to take care of minor injuries, something like Nancy was talking about with the 10 essentials. Excuse me. Need the first aid kit, and if necessary, prescription drugs. What you don't see on this list are things like deodorants and shampoo and camp soap and colognes, or God forbid, makeup. You just don't see that kind of thing on here because really, you really don't need that. It's like that extra change of clothing that Nancy was talking about. You'll just get past the need for that. You need to pack out toilet paper, so you need to Ziploc bags, and you need a trowel to properly take care of human waste. You do want to know how to treat and take care of common injuries, so things like blisters, but also burns, cuts. Those are the most common things that you're going to run into in the backcountry. So know a little bit about how to take care of those things and have the right stuff in your first aid kit. And also be able to recognize some more serious issues. Common ones are dehydration and hypothermia. So learn how to recognize those things in yourself and in others, and know at least enough first aid that you know what to do about those. Okay. So
Barry, I know we were going to do a breakout session here, but it's
we doing?
actually, it is 8:30. So
okay.
we're behind schedule.
Yep.
So it may be perhaps better for those who have any sort of time crunch if you just go ahead and review the next slide as opposed to actually doing the breakout rooms. Although
Yep.
I'm really disappointed because I think that would have been fun. We'll have to try and get that in next time.
Yeah, we'll have to try and do that next time. But okay. Yeah, well, we will skip that. But the topic we're going to cover quickly here, and that's multi-purpose tools. So we mentioned this earlier, but there's a lot of gear that you can carry that can serve multiple purposes. And the more that you can do this, the more that you can eliminate something by having another item serve dual purposes, the better off you'll be. So we've just listed a few here, and I won't go through them all. But if you look, for example, if you have a poncho, well, you can use that as a pack cover, obviously. And you can use it to sit on around the campfire. You can use it as a kitchen tarp if you need to. Something like a garbage bag, Nancy had talked about, you can use that as a poncho. You can sit on that. Trekking poles, they can double as tent poles. And in fact, some of the lighter weight tent options are the hybrid solutions that use a trekking pole instead of a tent pole. And that typically saves you maybe a pound and a half of weight. A water bottle that you're carrying with you to drink anyway on the trail. If it's some cold weather camping, you can heat up some water in that at night and use that as a hot water bottle and keep your feet warm. And I think we mentioned before a bandana that can double as a water strainer, as a bandage, as a sling, as a hat, God knows what else. So again, as you go through your gear list, if you see things that can serve multiple purposes, by all means, use it. Okay. So we're a couple of minutes over here, so I think we're going to move ahead and wrap things up. We do have a poll that we'd like to get a little bit of your feedback. If you could just let us know how we did, and the way we're asking that question is how many new things or interesting things maybe you came across in this session that you didn't know before. So if you just give us an idea of that. If there are specific things that you found particularly interesting and you want to toss that in the chat, that would be great. If there's particular things that you'd want to hear more about, that maybe we piqued your interest and you'd like to see a deeper dive on that, please throw that in the chat room as well. Okay.
So, Barry, we do have some questions. So after this poll, if you want to go into some live questions.
Okay, let's do that. I think we can go ahead and close out the poll. Okay. And let's see. Well, I guess we won't get into our sponsoring yet here, but what are some of the questions we got out there?
All right. Go ahead, Nancy.
I was just going to say, Christina, maybe we can unmute Christina, and she had a couple of questions. We can just let her ask them. Hang on a second. Christina, you are unmuted. Are you comfortable asking your questions out loud?
Absolutely. I was curious on the gaiters. I've seen people wear gaiters from very short ones to very tall ones. Some people don't wear them at all, and some people believe you got to have them. So I didn't know what the pros and cons were of gaiters, especially when we have such a variety of people using different things.
Yep.
Great question.
Yep.
So
you want to go ahead,
I'll start.
Nancy?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll start. And then I actually have 3 different pair of gaiters. I have tall ones, I have ankle high ones, and I have little thin stretchy gator girl or dirty girl gaiters. My tall ones I use, number one, if I'm going to be hiking in the snow, especially if it might be deep snow, to kind of help keep my pants legs dry. I'll also use them like when I'm going to be on a trail that I know is super muddy. And that's because, I don't know why, but when I walk, I kick mud all the way up to my knees on the insides of my pant legs. I don't know why I do that. So if I'm going to be out, rather than having to, crawl into my tent with mud all over my pants, I'll wear the taller gaiters. The shorter ones I'll wear just if I'm worried about like dirt and scree and, if I'm doing something where there's a lot of, I'm trying to think of the right word, but just dusty, gritty dirt to keep it out of my boots. I'll wear the short ones. And then the super thin dirty girl gaiters, they're real stretchy and lightweight, super lightweight, and I love them for that reason. They're great when I'm wearing like trail runners or lightweight shoes. They fit over those really nicely. And the smaller the gaiters are, the cooler they are and the lighter they are. So those are my reasons for those choices. Anybody else weigh in?
I will say, Nancy, I've noticed in the winter when I wear mine, the lower ones, you'd be surprised how they keep your feet warmer and your around that, you take them off and it's like, wow, I didn't realize it kept me that warm.
Yeah, I would agree with Denise. About the only time that I wear gaiters, I do have the same ones that Nancy has. I have a pair of short ones and a pair of taller ones. But the only time I wear them is actually winter kind of backpacking, because to Denise's point, keep your feet a little warmer and they'll keep snow from getting down into your shoes or your boots. But that's the only time I use them.
Barry, Christina had also asked about whether there's a first aid course coming up. We did have a wilderness first aid course on the calendar for, actually it already passed like 2 weekends ago, but it was canceled because right now, as Barry mentioned earlier, the Sierra Club is not having any in-person gatherings at all due to the COVID.
Right.
But
so,
is there just a regular one coming up?
There's nothing on the schedule. We're hoping to have one, but frankly, we're waiting on the next guidance from Sierra Club National as to when and how we can start having in-person events again. I do know there are some, I know it's true for wilderness first aid recertification. I think that there's also some things out there that are virtual events for first aid that are kind of a mix of lecture style or videos, and then some like one-on-one work to actually certify you. So that might be something to check out in the meantime. Okay. Did we have anything else?
No other questions, but I do see a post for everybody. Nicole did put a link in the chat box where you can access the PDF of the slides that Barry used today, the whole presentation, as well as a recorded copy of it, and some of the handouts that we referenced in there too. So that link is there for you. There's also a link to the schedule of future trainings that are coming up. So I think we have the next 3, I think, on the calendar. As I mentioned earlier, next Thursday, Brian is going to be leading a presentation on PACs. So you'll learn a lot more about PACs than the little bit we touched on today.
Great. And again, we'd really like to thank Roads, Rivers, and Trails down in Milford for their help. Miami Group Sierra Club was one of the other sponsors. And finally, Summit Trek and Travel. So thank you to all of our sponsors. And certainly thank you, all of the participants. We really appreciate the fact that you joined us, and we appreciate your participation. And we certainly hope to see you at future events or sessions, and just keep an eye out on the calendar for things that might interest you.
Hey, Barry, there's one more question that popped up in the chat box.
Yeah.
I was actually going to go here, and we can just hang out as long as there's questions,
Cool.
Someone's
Forgot that was the last slide.
Yeah, what are the best environmental friendly backpacking gear companies in terms of sustainable manufacturing and production?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah.
It's a very good question.
Brian?
Yeah. You know what? We actually have a tab on our website that kind of digs into that a little bit more, because there's a lot of things to look at. You know, everyone has a different concern. And there's a few different organizations that really track that. So you'll see things on tags like Blue Sign Approved or Fair Trade. There's another company, it's called the HIG Index, that tracks those kinds of things for us. And so, you know, it's pretty easy to deep dive into. You know, we definitely look for companies that use both sustainable materials and processes as well. So depending on if you're looking at clothing or gear, you know, clothing is really coming around where we're seeing more and more of that, whether it's Patagonia or Piranha, that's really good with their sustainability stories. RAB is also coming out with just fully recyclable goods, or recycled goods rather. And we're starting to see that on the gear side of things. That's kind of what's lagged behind thus far. But Osprey this past year came out with backpacks that are I think like 95% recycled post-consumer waste recycled material. And that's big, because that's kind of some of the stuff that's been left behind. We also see MSR, who manufactures a whole lot of stuff. They're made in Seattle, and they're really refining the process. So they redid some of their tent lines to no longer use the same kind of toxic coatings on the rain flies that we've seen for forever. So there's a lot going on with that. It's a good question, and I'm glad you're thinking about it.
Yeah, that is a great topic, and I'm reminded of some stories that I've read. Brian mentioned Patagonia and some of the clothing, and you know, we made a big deal about synthetics and wool. One of the downsides of synthetics is that through the wash cycle, tiny microfibers of the synthetic material, plastic, break off and enter the waste stream of the environment. And I know companies are really trying to grapple with that, because things like a fleece, they're just so great for these kinds of outdoor activities, and yet they're some of the biggest culprits for these microplastics entering the waste stream. So people like Patagonia are actually working very hard to figure out how to at least reduce that amount of I don't know the stuff coming off of their clothing when they wash it. So it's a great topic, and you know, I'm at least thankful that these companies are aware of the challenge and working on it.
Yep.
See anything else out there, Nancy?
No more questions in the chat box, unless I missed one. I think that was it.
Okay.
But anybody who, you still have a chance if you want to put one more question out there before we say goodbye.
Yeah, I'll note that also just longevity of product is something that we really look at. It's repairability in the companies that repair goods. When we're really looking at the sustainability story, something that will last and not need to be replaced, or something that could be repaired, is always going to obviously have less of that environmental impact. So that's big to us too, but always feel free to ask.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Any parting words, Nancy? Again, reminder that next Thursday we're going to do a deep dive on packs. I believe, is it Brian that's going to be leading that for us?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
Good.
All right.
We have a total of 10 of them planned. So again, if anybody has a special request of topics that you'd like us to address, let us know, and we'll do our best to be sure that we get it covered in those. I just want to say thanks to everybody for being on here and for sticking with us. Sorry we ran over again. We just like to talk too much. I don't know. It's like,
I know.
can't quit talking about backpacking
feels
stuff
that
since
way.
we can't do it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, again, thanks everyone for your participation. Thanks to fellow presenters here, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good evening.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.